Well, I'm very, very, very excited for this panel ahead of us because it is a topic that is no doubt going to dominate the headlines this year, and that is cybersecurity and the way new technologies such as AI might be aiding hackers in their attempts. Just a few intro stats about the state of cyber in 2023. There are around 2,300 cybercrimes thought to occur each day. $4.45 million, the global average cost of a data breach. There was more than a 50% rise in ransomware attacks last year, and now you add AI into the mix. What does that bring? Let me introduce my panelists to discuss this. First up, Dr. Dorit, the Chief Technology Officer of Checkpoint, Gary Steele, President and CEO of Splunk, and Mark Hughes, President of Security for DXC Technologies. Gary, I want to kick off with you because you said something interesting in the back. It's going to be a pretty bad year. 2024 for cybercrime. Just flesh out what you mean by that.
Well, I think it's obvious. We've got two active conflicts. We have a potential conflict brewing as well. We have elections around the globe. And as you indicated, we have ransomware on the uptick. So all of those indicators would suggest we're going to need to be fully vigilant this coming year, because I think it's going to be a challenging one. And if you go back in time during the election years, we see an increased level of cyber activity.
And for you, Mark, what are your expectations this year?
Absolutely the same, an increasing rise, especially in criminal activity. I think one of the things in cyber, we often think about and conflate the broad range of threat actors that are out there, the criminals and the criminal activity that we're seeing, exploiting known vulnerabilities. I think we're going to see a lot more of that. In fact, some of the estimates that we've seen is that we're talking trillions of dollars of impact. At DXC, we have 4,000 global customers constantly under attack. So I'm afraid the cadence is only going to increase for some of the reasons that Gary pointed out as well specifically, but there's a lot of already existing cadence out there.
And Dorit, for you, just set the scene for us. What are your expectations for 24?
Yeah, I think that we have a lot of geopolitical sensitivities, and these are driving some nation-state activities. But more than that, it also drives state-sponsored organizations and activists. So now the civilian organization that may be ideologically associated with geopolitical concerns are getting much more sophisticated tools. This is even before talking AI or election. So this is not like happening just now. It started to happen, and we see the increase of usage of tools. On top of that, you'd add how much assets we have in the internet, that it's very luxurious crime to make. You get access to a lot of capabilities. And you add on top of that, the AI would reduce the cost of entry, the barrier of entry to do these crimes.
Yeah, so there's a few things I want to get through. Thank you for setting the scene in the next 25 minutes. Ransomware, the use of AI by hackers, and in particular, election year concerns, and of course, the nation-state attacks. So since you mentioned the geopolitics, Dorit, and the concerns around that, there was an interesting report put out by Saxo Bank last year. Can I just quickly ask, does everyone know what a deep fake is? Yeah, generally? Okay, good. And they made this it's a report they put out every year called an outrageous prediction report. They're not saying it's going to come true, but it's certainly something to be aware of. And they said, for this year, that deep fakes could cause a national security crisis. Deep fakes might cause a senior government member, for example, to give up sensitive information. Now, as I said, it may not happen, but it's certainly a warning. Dorit, geopolitics, elections, what kind of attacks are you expecting from hackers this year? What do you think they're going to do? What do you think they're going to expect as a result of their attacks?
So I think usually when I speak about cyber attacks, these are a bit different than the election. I think the biggest fear in the election is social influences or high entities influences. Whereas when you talk about cyber attack, you usually talk about a zero-day commercial, taking over the place. So these are kind of a bit different two things. But with elections, definitely, on one hand, if you don't use tuning and targeted messages, you have a problem to get elected. If you do, kind of the same thing could be done by the other guys. So whether you already have a very sophisticated AI to do deepfake or not, it's not the only issue, because we also see social engineering that is very sophisticated. So maybe it wouldn't be deep fake, but it would be a call to somebody that pretend to be somebody else. So you could do one-on-one. If your target is very luxurious, you'd find a way to do it even without the mass of deep fake and AI. Hence, I think the the side of election would be highly influenced by the mass of influences, misinformation, disinformation, capability to do avatars, etc. The size of state nation is much more severe, like take down operations, disturb companies, distract the country, kind of ride the chaos. And these are two things that together become worse, but they are kind of two things that are independent.
Gary, for you, you mentioned the geopolitics, the conflicts going on, the elections as well. I guess just separating those, how are you expecting, cyber criminals to operate in regards to those various things, the conflicts that are taking place, and then of course the elections we're seeing as well?
Yeah, if you just go back in time, rewind the clock when the events surrounding the Ukrainian war started, it was widely anticipated that you would have Russian state-funded threat actors attacking companies operating around the Ukraine. Now, that didn't all come to pass, but you never know what will ultimately happen. And so as these events occur, is there a reason for state actors to target global companies? And I think it's incumbent upon everyone to think that that's probably could happen because we need to be prepared. And so I think about those active conflicts as potentially driving state actor activity. You couple that with elections, it brings state actors into the fold. And then undercurring all that, and you stated it in the beginning, ransomware is on the uprise.
Yeah.
It's not going down. And that is a well-funded industry, and the bad actors are winning financially. Yeah. And so as long as they're winning, they're going to continue that activity. So you've got this combination of events that I think it's the combination that makes it complicated. We haven't gotten to the AI topic, but as Dorit said, social engineering has been around for a long time. We're just going to see more sophisticated forms of social engineering. You can use a deepfake in the design of a socially engineered attack.
Yep.
It will just get more sophisticated. And I think all of that collectively then says, all of us in the security industry and working with customers, we all need to be very vigilant and begin to continue to push posture up and be that much more thoughtful. Because I think we're going to have a lot to deal with.
Right, we'll come on to ransomware and AI shortly. Mark, for you, nation-state attacks, are you expecting a rise in those this year? And I know attribution is a very difficult thing, but are there some obvious kind of culprits potentially you see this year?
I think it's already happening. I think, as we've already talked about, the geopolitical situation has meant that there are absolutely a rise in nation-state activity. I think that is already absolutely well documented in the public domain, so I think that is going to increase, given the geopolitical situation that we see, especially when thinking about the election situation as well. I want to come back to something that Gary was saying, which is that also creates what we often describe as a blast radius, which is that the potential flow-down impact into unwitting organizations that get caught by some of that activity. Yeah. As it stands to reason, as the volume of the nation-state activity increases, then that volume means that there are others that get involved through supply chains and through other related activity. Yeah. It is quite often unintended, the consequences of some of these are unintended, less so now than it used to be, but that is a very real issue that I think is going to rise as well. So I don't think it's just about nation-state activity increasing. I think there will be a flow-down impact, and we have to be very vigilant in business, our customers, always thinking about how we reassess risk against that in that backdrop.
Do you think companies and governments are prepared?
I think that we are always reconsidering and re-looking at risk. I think it's really what we've already mentioned a bit here, Dorit and Gary, about the tempo. And I say that word quite carefully in terms of the pace at which we have to do things in comparison to the threat actors. That's what's increasing. Now, I know we're going to talk a little bit more about AI in a minute, but that, I think, is the big thing that is going to change the tempo at which we have to reassess and reconsider the risk that we're facing and how we respond to that. That is what I think is really going to change.
So you've all mentioned ransomware. It's a fascinating industry because it's become very professional now. I was reading about how this idea of ransomware as a service, if you're sort of a hacker or a threat actor, you can effectively buy a prepackaged piece of ransomware and go out and carry your attack. It's absolutely fascinating. And there are companies that are operating various business models, subscription models, one-off payments, perhaps even taking a cut of the ransom when it's done. Absolutely fascinating. Dorit, for this year, how do you expect that ransomware industry to evolve?
Yes, so first, everything is as a service. Crime as a service, phishing as a service, deepfake as a service. You'd find everything, because if I'm very good at doing phishing, the best way for me is not to now necessarily go to the next level of attack, but to service as many phishing campaigns as I can by selling my phishing services. So this is an always evolving space. Everything that is kind of a form could be as a service. I think that the ransomware situation becomes more sophisticated in the ability of the attackers to know what's worthwhile attacking. So for example, we've seen attackers attacking companies that were insured because it's a public information by how much they are insured. And if the ransomware is in a lower number than the insurance, they are more likely to get the insurance paying than some company that doesn't have insurance. So there is a sophistication of learning the other side, learning the behavior, learning the patterns, and seeing what would be fruitful. So we see ransomwares that are sometimes less spread and more focused to places where they could demand a higher sum. If you remember, many years ago, ransomware was about encrypting my pictures. So if I really want my kid's picture back, I would pay $100 and get my pictures. This is not the ransomware we're talking. Now we're talking about ransoms of millions of dollars and triple extortion and more. So this is a much more targeted, tested audience for ransomware. But when you combine this with the state nation, I just wanted to mention one more thing. At the hands of geopolitical dispute and hacktivism, sometimes the ransomwares are really wipers. What is a wiper? A wiper is a ransomware where you lost the key. There is no intention to ever giving you the data back. And that's kind of a destruction ransomware. So we have that as well, and that's triggered because a crime group would not do this because their interest is to get the money, and you don't get the money this way. But a hacktivism group will potentially have this kind of attack. So ransomware is one thing, and wiper is kind of a different creature.
Fascinating.
And we have more wipers with the increase of state-nation activism, whether it's the state or the activist, it doesn't matter.
And just a note on ransomware, to oversimplify it, this is when hackers steal data from a company, encrypt it, and then demand a company pay ransom to get it back effectively. Gary, for you, one of the, well, it's not funny, but one of the most interesting stories I saw last year was a ransomware group called Lockbit, and their leader was, I think, offering money to the first 10 people who got Lockbit tattooed. So not only do they have a business model, but there's a marketing aspect behind it as well.
Everything is marketing.
So that, I think, underscores that the way that these groups are continuing to change. From an attack perspective, what are some of the things you're expecting this year on the ransomware front?
No, I think you can front end a ransomware attack in a lot of different ways. So we were talking about social engineering earlier. That's a classic way of getting ransomware into a company. And so I think what you'll see is the front end of ransomware getting that much more sophisticated. And as Dorit said, you'll see it extremely targeted. These ransomware actors will know exactly where they're going. They can use the tools that are available today to build highly sophisticated attacks that compel people to get enthralled into the trap of ransomware. And it's just going to be that much more complicated. And as you were describing, I think the thing we have to remember is it's an industry. Like, these people are making money. They are winning. And so that industry now, they're thinking about branding. They're thinking broadly about it as an industry. And so, you know, these are very complicated, and the trade-offs that people make on whether they pay the ransom or not, it's not easy. And I think a lot of people think, well, you should never pay ransom. You have to look at the impact on your business.
Yeah. Is the weakest link still the human?
Weakest link is always going to be the human.
It's not always, by the way. Sometimes it's kind of a supply chain, so you may have kind of a side-standing application that was never protected. Maybe nobody even saw it was somehow connected.
Yeah.
But I have another good story about ransomware, if you want. So one of the things in ransomware is actually, think about it as extortion. The data, whether you encrypted the data or not, is irrelevant. So now there is a new interesting form of extortion, because there is SEC regulation for companies to report their numbers. So now there are extortion companies, extortion campaigns that will threaten you, that they would report you to the SEC for being attacked. So that would be a reason for you to pay. That's really kind of, it becomes so sophisticated. Everything you do would kind of sometimes play everything.
Is that something you've seen, Mark?
Absolutely.
So the hackers will threaten to report you to the US Securities and Exchange Commission.
Or other regulatory authorities, because not everyone necessarily chooses to report.
But they're supposed to.
But they're supposed to, and if they are, or even if these threat actor groups think that you're supposed to, they think, well, we'll get a jump by doing that.
Because the rules are broadly, you need to report a sort of material breach.
Indeed, and the rules are changing. The SEC's just announced some new rules there as well. So look, that is something that is happening. And the other thing, beyond the straightforward extortion that you mentioned earlier, is also what I describe as the secondary and tertiary type ransomware situation, where at the same time as launching the actual malicious software that causes the encryption so it stops organizations from working, they also then steal information at the same time. And as an added incentive to get an organization then to pay, they then say, we'll threaten to start leaking the data, and then often will start leaking data to make sure that the victim knows that they are, the threat actor in this case, is serious. And back to that ecosystem that you're referring to, absolutely, there's a real industry ecosystem here. Access brokering, as we call it, so those that actually get the access to do the social engineering, those that then are very focused on the actual malicious software itself, those that then even run help desks to help organizations, if they have been impacted, to how they can actually run the decryption if they've then paid. So those are all an ecosystem of threat actors that have come together to make this so, it's so lucrative for them that that's why they're doing it. So we're seeing levels, as Dorit just said, levels of sophistication now that we haven't seen before. Why? And it's quite simply this. You put an organization where they're on the back foot, we see, in DXC, we see organizations get impacted by this all the time, and you then put the pressure on them. People will react, organizations will react in a certain way when they feel that pressure's on them. That's what they're exploiting.
Gary, it feels quite lose-lose for businesses, because you could have a backup of the data that's stolen, but if hackers are going to leak that, you kind of just have to pay the ransom or have your data leaked. So you could do all the good stuff and back up your data and whatever else, but there is still that part of it where in the end you may just have to cough up the money.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different tactics that the ransomware actors use to try to drive the economic benefit. The reality of any ransomware attack is a huge distraction for an organization. And even if you are perfectly backed up, the time to recover is something that people have to think about. Like, what is it cost to the business to drive that recovery process? For some organizations, it's relatively simple and can be fast. For others, it can be much more difficult. I think having a strong understanding of when a ransomware attack happens, what data did they actually get to? Maybe it's incredibly important operationally, but if it was released, maybe it doesn't matter.
Yeah. I think the key thing is by having backups, by having really thought it through, having rehearsed it, looked at where that most key critical data is for your organization, it gives you options when it happens, because I'm afraid that is often the case. It's when it happens, not if. That then gives you options for how you can then respond. And once you've got options, it then allows you to move into a less panicked situation. And I see those organizations, often it's not about tools and the type of security tools, it's about how prepared are you? Have you thought about how you're going to report? Have you thought about that sort of, a lot of work I do with my customers is about really taking them through those events so that they're really prepared. Comms, marketing, finance, all those things need to be thought through. That's often as important.
Right, let's get on to AI then. Dorit, generative AI, the ChatGPTs of the world exploded in popularity last year, but there are also tools that could be used by hackers in multiple ways. What are you seeing in terms of how cyber attackers are using AI and various tools to carry out or aid their attacks?
So actually see three things, and then I'll go back to the first. So the three things are how the attackers themselves are using it, how the defenders could use it to improve the defenses, and how the organization becomes so busy in protecting how they use the AI, which is not against the attacker or the defenders, just they need to all of a sudden guard their data and guard their AI engines and decide what's their policy. So these are three very different things. In each one of them, generative AI obviously super help productivity and efficiency. And so if you are a developer, it will help you develop. If you are a developer of a malware, it will help you develop. But if it's testing, so it will help you test. But if you're a malware kind of spreader, it will help you test that your malware attack will be successful. Right. It also helps you scale. So you could do it in a quantity of 1 when you are doing scripting, or you could do it in a quantity of 100 or 100,000.
Right. So this is writing the code for the malware.
Writing the code, testing it, operationalizing it, watching the outcome of the operation, and also targeting. So if I had to do phishing that is rather generic, I could do very specific. I could set an agent to research you, know more about you, and involve inside my phishing attack some personalized data that would seem to you as very knowledgeable and behaving as your whoever, spouse, family, boss, whatever you want to call it. So these are all useful things at the end of the defenders, but they are also used at the end of the attackers. The defenders improve their development, their testing, their scalability, their operationalization, and all of that, but the attackers do the same at the same time. I think that right now, the focus is on kind of scaling up the attacks. But over time, it may also create new forms or combination of attacks that we didn't see before because of the combination of tools and scalability and targeting that would bring more bad news in that sense. And hopefully the defenders would have more good news, and then we should see who's winning.
Yeah. Phishing, by the way, not the sport of catching sea creatures, but instead usually text messages or email that look like they come from a legitimate source, but have malicious software in them. Gary, for you, AI, what are some of the other ways you're seeing it being used? Are you seeing similar things to what Dorit?
Yeah, no, I think it's the same. And then you can just think about leveraging AI from a social engineering perspective, just starting at the most basic things of if threat actor, where English isn't first language, just getting English perfect. You know, all of the little details that ultimately make these phishing attempts super sophisticated and real. We talked about deepfakes, all of that capability that used to be really hard. You basically lowered the barrier for some threat actor to use these capabilities to drive much more sophisticated attacks. And so while I think it'll take some time for threat actors to fully incorporate AI into how they build everything, they're going to get benefit right out of the gate. And they're going to see benefits immediately, and it'll be incumbent again upon the defenders to be able to detect these kinds of things and be that much more sophisticated to be out in front of it.
I mean, we're seeing it already. So as Gary and Dorit have said, WormGPT is out there. It's known as a threat actor groups are using it, which is that very straightforward use case around phishing. I mean, how many of us now see phishing emails that are poorly written and everything else? It's gone. It's finished. It's today. It's real. The phishing attempts now, that line of defense, which used to be, look at it and it looks like it's rubbish because we know it is, that's gone. Yeah. So this is for real. And so I think what both Gary and Dorit have said is that what we're seeing is there's not that many use cases. A couple of that I will mention, deepfakes we've spoken about, but think about my password is my voice, for example. The use there of a little snippet of voice can now be engineered for social engineering. And so some of those tools you really have to rethink and the use of deepfakes. Another area specifically that we're seeing is the ability for threat actors now to reverse engineer code very quickly. Sounds quite technical, and it is, but it really does then, where we've used techniques like obfuscation to help with protecting code. Those techniques now, with the ability to reverse engineer stuff, which used to take sometimes days, can now be done in minutes.
What are they reverse engineering?
Code. They take code that is out there, reverse engineer it, find out using natural language, you know, how things have been obfuscated there, to then make it more, to work out where the vulnerabilities are.
Right.
So they can attack it. Yeah. So those things are there. They're not astronomically new in terms of techniques, but what they are is two things. It allows for a cadence, a speed, as Gary was saying, of being able to do things very quickly, which they would have taken time before, and it's a much lower barrier to entry. So what that means, though, is that sometimes I've heard a little bit like, well, because that is the case, there's nothing really new, so what? So everything. It completely changes the dynamic. You have to now not become complacent, reassess and reevaluate the risk, and think about the mean time to detect of these types of attacks has suddenly now needs to shorten enormously. And that's really where, as a defender, we really have to be very alive to, even though they might not be brand new techniques. It's the way these techniques are being used is now really upping the risk quite significantly.
I wanted to add to this. If in the past there was a stream of attacks, and let's say some percentage of this stream arrived to people in the security operations center or to security personnel, and they would treat them manually. If you 100-fold the amount of attacks at entry and you didn't change the percentage of detection or prevention, cleaning, the number that would get to people is enormous. So you have to uplift your defenses proportionally or more to be kind of at a good place.
Yeah.
And you have to be much more accurate in knowing when to involve a person in the loop, and you have to be much more real time because these are coming at you at real time. So the scale doesn't matter if you were 100% automated before and you were 100% hygiene and clean, that could sustain no matter how much you take the scale up.
Yeah.
But if the scale was at some point reaching a human, you cannot allow it to scale more. You have to keep up your defenses to guard how much gets to humans.
Gary, Dorit's talking about the response then, I guess, to these new attacks. Who's winning? Is the industry up to speed on what's going on, and businesses, are they protected against, some of these new techniques that these threat actors are using?
No, I think that the defenders are moving at a good speed. And if you look across the security industry today, machine learning's been widely adopted across security vendors. That's not an uncommon thing. And I think the defenses and the mechanisms that we as defenders have continue to get better. So I'm not a doom and gloom person. I just think we need to be ready for what's next. Yeah. And it puts pressure on vendors such as ourselves to continue to up our game, to drive a pace of innovation that's going to be important to our customers. But it's also incumbent upon everyone to be more vigilant. We're going to have to be that much more focused on ensuring that the threat actors don't win.
And is the industry using some of these AI tools themselves?
Sure. I think we all.
Could you give me some examples?
I mean, just in productivity alone. So we talked about threat actors now having a productivity leap. We have the same. So we at DXC have implemented, AI tooling in our security space that gives us enormous gains in productivity. Something that might have taken, hours even to do now, we can quickly get to with natural language that's baked in as well, very quickly. Things that would have taken, you'd have to write complicated use cases and code strings to be able to get to, you can do now in a matter of minutes. And that really gives us a jump.
I think that the evidence that it's okay is by all of us using the cyber world and the digital world on a regular basis. Yeah. If I told you 20 years ago that you'll manage your money online and your health online, etc., but then I'll tell you at the same time that there would be many attacks around. Yeah. So you may have said, no, so that means I won't manage my money and my health over the internet, etc. But you do. Yeah. It means that you have some trust level. It's not 100%. It's not that nothing could happen, but we do conduct our businesses, and we never think to go back to the Stone Ages just because of that. And that's what we should make sure we are, but we should all the time expect higher and aim higher and make, address new technological threats, etc.
I started by asking at the start what your expectations for 2024 were, and they were a little bit terrifying. But I want to ask as we end, what you're optimistic about in 2024 in the industry. Dorit, I'll start with you. What are you optimistic about this year?
I'm optimistic because I'm a techie. I think the AI is going to do very well, and it would open up a lot of innovation and a lot of opportunities for equality, cyber equality and other equality. And so I'm optimistic that using the new tools, we could do much better.
As well as the tools, I'm very optimistic about the fact that we're now reimagining threat actors and how they're thinking. This is what we see in our business with our customers, is that reimagination leads to now really focusing in on where the important process information is in organizations in the supply chain. That even before you think about the tools and techniques, that focus allows for the ability to now protect and defend against the types of things we're talking about in a much more efficient way. I'm really optimistic about that.
And for you, Gary?
Yeah, and I'm super optimistic about the pace of innovation that we're seeing across the security industry. And I really believe that the security industry will step up and meet the requirements that our customers have. And the other piece that I see that we make great improvements is broader cooperation across governments and the private sector. And that cooperation, I think, is really important in this particular geopolitical time. So I think the combination of those two things, I feel good.
Well, it's certainly going to be an exciting year, that's no doubt. Thank you for all your insights. I learned a lot through that conversation, and it's going to be fascinating to see how this year plays out. Gary, Mark, Dorit, thank you so much for your insight. Round of applause for the wonderful panel. Thank you.